What is going on, everyone? Welcome into Bayou Bengals football. So let's get into it. So with LSU this year, Brian Kelly, does him beating Nick Saban in year one buy him some time? I think it's a good question to ask. I think, let's say LSU really falls apart this year. It's like a 6-7 win season. I think if he hadn't have beat Nick Saban year one, I think next year at this time, next year around this time, coming off a 6-7 win season, if all things collapse, I think, there wouldn't be as many hot seat rumblings. I think, beating Alabama and Nick Saban is something that not a lot of coaches in general have done, but not LSU coaches have really struggled. Les Miles got off to a fairly good start, was 3-3 at one point against Nick Saban, but then at the end of his career, eventually fell to 3-7. You remember LSU had that long losing streak after they beat beat Alabama in the 2011 regular season, and then they lost several in a row up until 2019. So that was huge, getting that win under Nick Saban. That had to felt like such a relief for Brian Kelly, because Brian Kelly, Nick Saban's chasing. He's chasing something, he's chasing like something historic. I think he arguably is the best college coach of all time. Brian Kelly seemed to be chasing Nick Saban, and that was something that I'm sure really was making an emphasis to do in year one. I'm not sure how much he expressed it to his players, but that I'm sure he was going the extra mile, whether that was putting in extra time in the office, coming up with different schemes, thinking of different ways to beat them, like the 2-point conversion try that they got to Mason Taylor. So all of that really resonated into an outstanding performance. And Brian Kelly, I think he understood at Notre Dame they were limited as far as recruiting the offensive defensive line, and really limited as far as the number of high-end level players they can get. See, Notre Dame was weird. Notre Dame, their recruiting kind of reminds me of Michigan now. They do get a handful. They do not get like the top-end guys. They don't have the depth and recruit the guys in the trenches, but they do get some, key NFL difference makers. Like, look at Notre Dame, Jalen Smith, Kyle Rudolph, Manti Te'o was a good college player. I guess that's not the best example, but for Michigan has done, Daxton Hill, Jabril Peppers. I know he hasn't been great in the NFL, but Aiden Hutchinson. Michigan has got some NFL difference makers. I know that's maybe not the best example, Aiden Hutchinson, because he's on the D line, but Michigan's got, Notre Dame, they had difference makers, not always up front. And I know they had Quentin Nelson, you could say. They've had some, Liam Eichenberg, some offensive linemen, but there was, a few guys here and there. It was not consistently, SEC level size, SEC level physicality, and there was not the depth on the defensive line, even though they had some good defensive linemen. So now that he can recruit the trenches at a high level is big, and you see him establishing pipelines. I believe Hurd and Will Campbell were from the same high school. So I like what he said about recruiting the state of Louisiana. They asked him about, a lot of the talent is right in your backyard, and he said, yeah, I knew about it at Notre Dame, but also, you have to find the guys. And just because a guy is rated highly by 24/7 Sports or Rivals in Louisiana doesn't mean he's going to be a high-end level player. So the coaching staff still has to do his research. Brian Kelly has to do his research and make sure that guy can play and is a good fit for their system. But yeah, Javian Toviano, the safety they're bringing, it sounds like there's high praise for him. I've been watching some of the press conferences, listening to what guys had to say. Matt House, it seems like he's confident in where the defense is at. Looking forward to get Mason Smith back. Sounds like the young guys look pretty well. Omar Spates, he had high praise for him. Says he doesn't say a whole lot, but just as a guy that sounds like he leads by his play. His play does a lot of the talking. So the coaching staff, there's high praise for Omar Spates. They had a press conference with Omar Spates during the spring. It seems like a lot of LSU fans are excited for what he's going to bring to the table and how he's going to help this football team in the fall. And then Ovie Oghoufo, it was fun to listen to Ovie Oghoufo. He was a guy that played for Brian Kelly at Notre Dame and at Notre Dame, and then transferred to Texas. So, and they asked him about what he felt or how he felt about Brian Kelly in Notre Dame, and he was like, yeah, he thought that he liked the way that Brian Kelly approached things. He thought that he brought a winning mindset. And Brian Kelly, despite what people say about him, Notre Dame fans especially may have their opinions. The guy is a winner, and he's won at Grand Valley, Central Michigan, Cincinnati. Led Cincinnati to an outstanding season, and then ran, but. Brian Kelly, yeah, he's won a lot of games, and players. He has earned players' respect, and it's with all that into consideration, it's no wonder why he has done so well in the transfer portal. He has established credibility as a coach. This guy that knows how to build. His why is to build great young men. So build great young men, develop guys that not only become good guys, strong, proud men, but also guys that they go on to have success in the NFL. And that's what it's all about. Can you get me to the next level? It's more so, we're in a more so an individual. It's all about me. It's an individualistic society. Can you get me to the NFL? But I like that Brian Kelly, when he took the job at LSU, he established a why. His why was, creating the best men possible, creating guys that, become really, go on to become good family men, go on to become good football players. And being a Michigan fan, that's something that Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan program seem to have done for a lot of years when they were successful. I think, maybe that doesn't always get fans excited because people always want to preach the cliche. It's winning. Winning cures everything. It's all about winning. But it is too when you develop good, strong, mentally tough men. I think that's crucial, and it shows not only off the field or not only on the field but off the field as well. So. I think it's cool that Brian Kelly established the why. But yeah, Matt Denbrock talked about the wide receivers. It sounds, it's interesting. It sounds like the freshman might make some impact. He's like what he's seen out of Jaylen Brown, Shelton Sampson Jr. I think one of those guys, like I've touched on, is going to have an impact and make a difference. Chris Hilton Jr. Does Chris Hilton Jr. really flash this year? Chris Hilton Jr. I think he's got a fairly good skill set. Like I touched on, he's a guy that knows how to get open. That just in the spring game, there was some drops. So I think that is the big thing, though, as a receiver. Can you get open? Obviously, I sound, that maybe doesn't sound like the smartest take because you need to have hands as a receiver, but can you get, as a receiver, do you have the skill set, the route running, the presence of mind, change of direction to get open first? That's the thing. You can have the greatest hands in the world, but if you're not consistently getting open. So we've established that Chris Hilton Jr. knows how to get open. He's got some size, some length. Can we shore up his hands? Can we improve on the contested catches? Can we improve on the yards after the catch? That was another thing that Denbrock touched on in the spring press conference was we want to improve on getting yards after the catch. And I think that's something that LSU did kind of struggle with us a little bit. I think of Brian Thomas' skill set. Brian Thomas at receiver is not necessarily a yards after the catch guy, but Malik Neighbors can be. But can there be another guy that is a yards after the catch guy? I think, Brian Thomas does have some yards after the catch ability. That's not really his high-end level trait. So maybe Matt Denbrock was saying indirectly that who is the guy that, if he has upside, who is the guy that can be another yards after the catch guy? Mason Taylor has established himself at the tight end position, and he's looking for who's the next guy that's going to step up. Some of the young guys look pretty good, but Mason Taylor, you as a team, whether you're in college or in the NFL, it's nice to have another tight end too. Having one really good tight end like Mason Taylor, who is a star, is awesome. But can you if you can establish another guy, I think that's big. Two tight ends. Like I said, as a Lions fan, the Lions have done a good job developing depth at tight end. I just use them for example. They had they traded T.J. Hawkinson because they believe that Brock Wright, James Mitchell, some of the young guys, and then they drafted Laporta this year. They've done a good job of, say they just had Lions had Laporta and then a couple guys that were just beyond the brinks of making the roster. and you had one guy, I mean, yeah, you'd feel pretty good, but man, you know, depth. I guess the point I'm trying to make is depth at tight end is awesome. So Mason Taylor, you know, even though he's going to be an impact guy, can there be guys behind him that can, you know, when you use some tight end sets, you know, you don't want all eyes on, you know, all eyes are not on Mason Taylor anymore. You know, some of the attention is gone to the other tight end because you know that he's a threat. Not only as a pass catcher, but a guy that can really, you know, get off the ball and sustain some blocks and be excellent in pass protection. But yeah, as for the offensive line, I was listening to Emory Jones talk, Will Campbell talk, and yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting how excited they are for the offensive line. They believe it's going to be one of the strongest units in the country, and you know, I think it's going to be right there. I mean, when you start with two bookend tackles and then you got experience, like if I told you, let's say we're talking about an offensive lineman we're talking about LSU's offensive line, and we're saying we don't know who's that, and you don't know it's LSU. Let's say we start with they have bookend tackles, and they have experience on the interior with a solid guard and center. Then you say, wow, that offensive line's probably going to be one of the top units in college football. If you just say, you know, 2 stars, bookend tackles, experience on the interior. It sounds like a recipe for one of the best offensive line units in college football. And I think that's big when you have an offensive line that is a strong, cohesive unit and there's not really weaknesses. Because, you know, sometimes you have an offensive line where maybe you have a really good tackle, but the interior is weak, or the interior is strong, but you have 2 weak tackles and the edge rushers can just get around the edge on you. So when you have an offensive line that's no weakness, I think that is huge, because the offensive line, everyone talks about the offensive line is one unit in all of sports that is like the most of a cohesive unit, meaning it's more of like the sum of all its parts, meaning that even if, say you have just 5 solid players on the offensive line, but they all mesh together, they all can, you know, pick up stunts quickly, know how to help each other, then that cohesive unit's going to be stronger than maybe a guy with, you know, offensive line with 5 really good players, but they don't know how to, they don't play well together. They don't know how to, help each other, read one to give help and stuff. So LSU, their experience, and then their all-around talent, and then they're working on getting their depth. That's what they're talking about. In spring practice, they did not have a lot of depth on the offensive line. That's going to come in the fall, when they bring in some more guys. So yeah, they were a lot of guys were getting more reps. Emory Jones was talking about they were getting a little more tired, but yeah, I think, you know, more reps is outstanding. Obviously, they don't want to work them too hard. And, they luckily, you know, coming out of spring ball without injuries is something Brian Kelly touched on, and that's critical, because you just, you know, that's not only Brian Kelly saying that, but a lot of coaches say that. Can you come out of spring ball without injuries? I think is crucial. So, yeah, I was on Reddit today. I was talking with some of the LSU fans. And one guy brought up an interesting point. I posted in that chat. I think it's interesting. Does Zaylen's Hurd play? And one guy actually talked about, you know, maybe moving Emory Jones to guard, and then Zaylen's Hurd ends up playing the right tackle position. I think it's interesting because, like I touched on, I think Hurd could be a guard, but I think also Emory Jones could be a high level guard as well. So I think that, you know, I think that putting Jones at guard, I think Jones, he is really good at holding run blocks. So yeah, Hurd, Campbell, I think, you know, with those three, if Hurd is as good as we think, like if he is the type of guy that can make an impact like Will Campbell and Emory Jones did as a freshman, then I think that is the move, than trying to get those 3 guys on the field rather than keeping Hurd as a reserve guy at tackle. Moving a guy to guard is not always the end of the world. Some guys, you know, you see some really good tackles, move to guard and have a lot of success at guard. You know, there's nothing wrong with an outstanding guard. Just ask the Colts with Quentin Nelson. even like my Detroit Lions drafting Penei Sewell. Sewell, he's a guy that's excelled in the NFL at tackle, but he could have played guard as well. There is like Skoronski this year. That was the talk. He might even play guard in the NFL. Is he a tackle? Is he a guard? Why not? That's the conversation. Do you want just a really solid tackle, or do you want an elite guard? And if Emory Jones, you could argue he's more than a solid tackle, but could he also be an elite guard? I think that is the question with Emory Jones. So let's shift gears here to the defensive line for LSU. And if Mason Smith's going to get all the talk. If LSU wins games this year, Mason Smith is going to be a presence and a big-time factor in a lot of the key wins for LSU this year. But there's one guy, Mekhi Wingo. Mekhi Wingo has established himself as a good player for LSU. But if there's one guy on this LSU team that his play is going to be his play will be more critical than any other, it's probably Mekhi Wingo. Mekhi Wingo needs to have a really good season. And don't expect him to be Mason Smith. Don't expect him to be elite, potential top 10 draft pick, number, 1 or 2 defensive tackle off the board. That's probably not who Mekhi Wingo is, but he's a rock solid college player who I think is a nice compliment to Mason Smith. This is a guy that can play D tackle. I think he does have the versatility to play nose tackle. I think they will be strong at the nose tackle with a couple, with some transfers they brought in, a couple guys I'll get to in a minute. But Mekhi Wingo needs to really play well for LSU to have success this season, because Mason Smith's going to get his, but Mekhi Wingo, his play is going to be really indicative of LSU being strong and stout up front and being dominant against the run and the pass. And the thing about Wingo is he's really good in pursuit too. This guy that can pursue ball carriers super well also. So Mekhi Wingo going to play an important role on the LSU defensive line, an important role to their success this season. So some of the other guys, they got Jacoby Gilroy. This is a guy that was a pretty high recruit, just has not really lived up to the hype at LSU, has just not played a lot of football and has not really been impactful, but is a guy that he is a presence inside. When I went back and watched some of his high school tape, 6'2", 320, a big physical presence. I think he can be stout against the run. Certainly will add some depth at nose tackle, a guy that did make a couple starts last year. I think will rotate, should be a strong guy to rotate in with Wingo. Maybe he does show the versatility to play like the 2-tech, true D tackle, or line up, in the 3-tackle or the 3-tech between the guard and tackle. But you got to believe that Gilroy fits the mold as being a nose tackle, and hopefully you can get a little more out of him. Hopefully he does take another step in his development next season. Jalen Lee was another guy that they got on the defensive line in the transfer portal. He's actually a Louisiana native, played for Florida the last few seasons. Not really impactful for Florida, sadly, but maybe this is a guy like Gilroy. This is a year where he really can flash and you get the most out of him. But the guy I really wanted to get to, Jordan Jefferson. I think Jordan Jefferson is a really underrated player they got in the transfer portal, defensive tackle from West Virginia. Jefferson, there was times when he got double teamed. When I was watching some of his tape at West Virginia, he could get pushed back a little bit. But this is a guy that's very strong in the upper body. He's got active hands. He does have enough quickness and burst to beat offensive linemen when they're moving, when they are down blocking in zone. So I like Jordan Jefferson's game. I think he'll be a strong piece of the LSU defensive line. I think he'll make a lot of plays, make a lot of tackles. I think he'll be impactful. Paris Shand, another guy they landed from Arizona. Shand's a good player. Did some nice things for Arizona. Just played in 9 games the last 2 years, but does have quite a bit of experience as a guy that 6'5", 280. Jordan Jefferson, a big guy too, a defensive tackle. So they do have some size. I think that leads me to my next point. Deshaun Womack is the 5-star defensive end that they're bringing in. I think Brian Kelly's plan is, okay, we got size. We got some guys that are stout against the run. We've added depth in the defensive line. Hopefully we stay healthy. Mason Smith is kind of our unicorn, guy that's versatile. We can line him. At 3 tech, you can move him out to like the 4 or 5 tech, maybe even, stand him up. I think he does. I don't know if that's necessarily his strongest suit, but he certainly could do it. So Mason Smith, the guy that can do it all. Now we have some size inside with Wingo, Jefferson, even Paris Shand, who's a guy that, him and Savion Jones, true defensive ends, guys that, true 3-4 tech defensive ends. So now, you got guys that can stuff the run, big physical presence, run stoppers. Now you add Deshaun Womack. Deshaun Womack, when I watch his tape, I worry that he does not have a lot of upside just because I think some of the power, the speed to power, the quickness to power is missing from his game. But this is a guy that certainly can win with speed. He's got really good pursuit. He's a guy that can create havoc in the backfield when teams are running read options, and is a really strong tackler. He's got instincts for getting the ball on fumbles. So Womack, I think, even though I don't know how high of an upside he has as an all-around pass rusher, I think he is certainly a guy that his speed rush will be a nice compliment. And to me, this goes back to another. I think when you really dive into a football team's roster in the way they're recruiting and then their depth chart, I think you start to see the whole picture of the plan in place as far as recruiting. I think that was the plan with Brian Kelly and this coaching staff, probably Matt House, the defensive coordinator, and some of their assistants. Let's get a cohesive unit that complement each other. I think that's what was it. I was talking about Matt Denbrock, the offensive coordinator, talked about this a little bit. With the tight ends, that they have a unit that complements each other. I think that's what they're trying to get at on the defensive side of the ball. They want a unit that really complements each other well, not as opposed to, ideally you want a bunch of guys like Mason Smith who are just unicorns that are dominant against the run. They're athletic. They can hold the point of attack. They can set the edge. Ideally you want a group of defensive linemen like that. But if you do, then you have 2021 Georgia. Obviously you can't do that every year. So let's just get guys that, can do a lot of nice things and complement each other well. And a lot of times in the transfer portal, you can't always be picky. Like I think, for example, Jalen Lee is a guy maybe LSU wouldn't have been high on LSU's list. I mean, a guy that played at a big-time school. He played high school football at Louisiana, so he kind of, played in the SEC, high school in Louisiana. So from a how should I say this? I guess it makes sense from from a logical standpoint, I guess, why they would choose him, it makes sense as far as proximity to home, and he's a local guy, but Jalen Lee, a guy that still needs to be productive, and that's the thing with the transfer portal. I think a lot of times, I think Brian Kelly in the LSU coaching staff is a true example of, you use the transfer portal to create depth. I think a lot of schools want to swing for the fences and get like Michigan State had with Kenneth Walker, or actually staying with LSU like LSU had with Joe Burrow in 2019. They want or Alabama, Jamison Williams. You get my point. You want a lot of teams are trying to swing for the home run play. Hey, how about we just get good football players? And it's interesting with the transfer portal. It's interesting to see, okay, Jordan Jefferson, you watch him at West Virginia. You see, a big guy that's not going to play maybe a ton of snaps, but, powerful upper body, made an impact in the Big 12, which is, not the best conference as far as, defensive linemen go anymore, but, he's still a big presence and, excuse me, powerful hand. So let's see how he can make an impact for our football team. He can add depth. He can be a key contributor even if he doesn't start. Maybe he can play special teams. There's not everyone's just thinking, hey, let's get Kenneth Walker with Michigan State where he's our identity of our football team. Let's get Joe Burrow where he's going to, shatter records for passing yards. That's, this is LSU. Like, I'm just kind of building off this point, rambling a little bit, but LSU, Brian Kelly, they got a plan, and they appear to know what they're doing in the transfer portal, landing the number 1 transfer class. And I think one of these guys is going to make an impact. Omar Spates has got to be the popular pick for the impact guy. I think Deuce Chestnut might be interesting. I didn't dive into Chestnut's tape too deep. I watched the tape of one of his teammates, the guy that transferred to Ohio State. But I think Chestnut is a guy that can play the ball pretty well. Zy Alexander, another transfer they got too. I think he might be the guy in the secondary that really stands out from southeastern Louisiana. It's kind of hard to see how his game's going to translate going from that low level, because you see guys that, not really very good at Division I school, and then they go to FCS and are fairly impactful. I think it's hard to evaluate because it's just such a big jump. It's even harder. Like, so you could argue that it's hard to evaluate how a guy is going to translate from high school to college. But now with these prep academies, you do see them against such good competition that you can get a good grasp. Against FCS competition, it's almost like they're, playing against lesser guys than high school. Obviously they are more mature, but you kind of get my point. It can be tough to evaluate players from the FCS level. But Alexander, certainly his ball skills, and he is a guy that could be strong in that secondary. So staying with the secondary, I think LaTerrence Welch is a guy that's got to play well. Welch, I didn't really get to watch. I haven't watched his tape a whole lot, but he does a guy that looks like he can play man-to-man coverage fairly effectively. Looks like he's got some size and some length. So can he just, can he just build off of those two strengths? I don't think he is like the best at, long speed, acceleration, change of direction, all that. But can they work with him, his man coverage ability, quiet feet, able to mirror receivers and length? Can they build off that skill set? Can that be the foundation for how they build off and develop LaTerrence Welch? Sage Ryan, another guy. Sage Ryan, the coaching staff talked about how he's improved. They just need him to be more consistent. I think that would be my assessment of Sage Ryan so far, former 5-star recruit coming out of high school in the 2021 class. Yeah, I think Ryan, maybe was a little overhyped, but I think obviously if a guy is a 5-star, there is some traits there that you can use to really to develop him. And with Sage Ryan, I think that this is a guy who, I don't know. I think he's trying to find a true position. He can cover, he can tackle. So that's kind of the baseline starting point for a defensive back. So can they put him can they find a true position for him? I think is the first question. And the second question is, when they find that position, how or what's the max we can get out of Ryan, and can he play consistently? So I think those are the questions you ask with Sage Ryan. But with the linebacking core, I think staying with, we'll talk star Harold Perkins. A lot of LSU fans just love talking Harold Perkins. So we'll talk some Harold Perkins. Harold Perkins, I think, he's got, like I said, he's got a chance to become the most feared college football player this year. I think this is a guy you're talking about for the 2000. When it comes to the 2025 NFL draft, is a potential top 3 to 5 pick. But hopefully he doesn't fall into the Isaiah Simmons mold of, what position is this guy. But I think with Harold Perkins, you just want at linebacker, they're just, try to keep things simple for him. This is a guy where you don't want him thinking too much out there. Okay, let's start simple. Let's say, go get the ball, Harold. Just go get the football. I think that, hopefully, Spates. I think Spates, with his maturity, is the guy they're going to put a lot on as far as to create coverage, communicate with the defense. I would put more on Omar Spates since he's a veteran, and with Harold Perkins, just have him go get the ball. But it sounds like they interview in Ovi Ogofu's press conference, the transfer from Texas that played at Notre Dame prior to that. He said that Harold Perkins is fun to watch. Sounds like he's an outgoing guy, which is awesome. I listened to him mic'd up, and he sounds like a guy that brings the energy. I'm sure. I haven't heard anything. I'm sure he has a very strong work ethic. A guy that talented usually has a really, really strong work ethic and is really dedicated to the game. But so Harold Perkins is going to be really dominant for LSU this year, and just an incredible talent. But yeah, let's see. Yeah, another guy with the defensive line, Savion Jones. Savion Jones, a guy that's been a starter, was a starter for him this past year. Jones was a pretty good player. You see, he is kind of fits the mold of a hustle guy. I think Jones is a guy that is going to be a core piece to the LSU success, like Wingo. Can he have his best season yet? I think is the point I really should make, like I did with Wingo. Can Savion Jones, Mekhi Wingo, guys that are pencil starters but maybe not have the upside that Mason Smith has, can they have their best season yet? I think that's going to be key for LSU this year. And back to the offensive line, DJ Chester was a top offensive lineman they recruited on the interior. So, does he play at all this year? You hope that the interior offensive line stays healthy, but they did. Excuse me, they did have a couple guys banged up on the offensive line. Now, not just this year, but last year. So, does Chester get a shot? Is Chester, is he a key? Is he a key contributor? Is he the first guy they call upon if someone does get hurt? But yeah, that in the receivers, Jaylen Brown, Shelton Sampson Jr., you got to believe that it seems like, not just with LSU, but with every program, one of these true freshmen is going to break out. Javian Toviano. Sounds like Toviano is getting the most praise. Usually it tends to be the guy that is getting the most praise in spring practice. Now, fall camp's still a ways away, so we got to see there. But yeah, it is usually the guy that's getting a lot of praise. So maybe it is Toviano. So we'll see there. But yeah, sticking with the offensive line, yeah, I can't wait to see this offensive line play. And yeah, Jaden Daniels, you hope that his decision-making clears up well, or hopefully it improves. But I think it's interesting. I see a lot of LSU fans pointing towards, wanting Garrett Nussmeier. And I'd be interested to take a poll. I'm on the LSU Reddit page, LSU fan page, LSU football page for Reddit. I would be interesting to take a poll and see how many people would rather have Garrett Nussmeier as opposed to Jaden Daniels. Personally, I don't know. I think that it's interesting. Brian Kelly, I was surprised last year, close to this time when he named Jaden Daniels a starter. I thought for sure Garrett Nussmeier was going to win it because I remember watching Garrett Nussmeier in the spring game. Prior in the 2022 spring game, so a year ago, and I was like, man, Garrett Nussmeier is pretty impressive, and he still does impress me, but I thought he would sneakily win the job, and Brian Kelly announced Jaden Daniels. I think a lot of that was Jaden Daniels, his floor. I think Brian Kelly's probably thinking with Jaden Daniels was, okay, his floor is probably good enough to win us at least an SEC title. So we'll go from there. But this year will be interesting. So say Jaden Daniels does struggle. How quickly does Brian Kelly pull the trigger to go to Garrett Nussmeier? I think is a big, an interesting question. I think it's one that maybe will get answered. Maybe we'll get answered week 1 against Florida State. We will see. We certainly will see there. But, yeah, in LSU, the running back depth, they landed a Khalib Osborne, too, at running back. So, yeah, the running back room, maybe does one of these, Logan Diggs, the transfer from Notre Dame, or does Osborne, one of the true freshmen, become, make an impact and kind of steal the show and become one of the main guys? Josh Williams. I've touched on Josh Williams. I think he does not get enough respect for what he can do. He's a guy that can catch, can run between the tackles. Not the biggest guy in the world, but is certainly, you see plays where he breaks multiple tackles. I think he certainly is an impact player at running back for LSU, and I don't think he's a guy that should be forgotten about. Obviously, Noah Cain's a good player. Goodwin's a nice player. The LSU running back room kind of gets disrespected as a whole, but there is capable guys on this LSU roster. And, running back position, to me, if I'm in the SEC, if I'm at a school like LSU, running back to me is a position I don't really worry about. Or just about any big-time school, because it seems like every big-time school finds a running back. Like, Oklahoma seems to always find a running back, with the exception of maybe a couple years. Texas has been kind of that weird program that has, but it seems like even like Ole Miss has found guys over the years. Obviously, Quinshawn Judkins, the guy they have now. A lot of schools just tend to find a good running back. You got to believe that LSU with their pedigree is gonna find a guy, even if say they're not fully believers in the guys they have returning or the guys incoming. Maybe likely next year they could find a guy, whether that's via the transfer portal or with the dominant or the really good recruiting class they're having right now. Maybe there is a guy that they land in this upcoming class that can be that guy next year and make an impact via transfer or as a true freshman. So yeah, the running back room doesn't get a lot of respect, but I think it does. I think there is a lot of talent overall, and I'm excited to see who really shines. And kind of like Matt Denbrock was saying about the running backs, I think a lot of who becomes the go-to guy in a certain game, I think is indicative of how they start the game and who's the hot hand. Say they have a game where they want to run more gap scheme run plays, then maybe they go to their guy who's better at gap scheme run plays. Noah Kane seems to be more of a north and south runner, so maybe they have a game where they want to run a lot more man blocking schemes, or just inside inside runs, get him going downhill. Run some power. Maybe Noah Kane is their guy. If there's games where they need to, pass it more, maybe they're trailing, then Josh Williams is their guy. It seemed like Josh Williams did get the most reps in games where it was, close, or like against Georgia where there was trailing just because of the threat out the backfield. Goodwin, too, obviously would be that case, too, because Goodwin is capable out the backfield as well. So in games they were trailing or they need the receiving threat, then Armani Goodwin would be the guy. Yeah, the coaching staff. I think it's an interesting coaching staff. Frank Wilson gets high praise from the other assistant coaches. The job he's done at running back. LSU. It seems like talking about how LSU and some schools just seem to find running backs. It seems like LSU just seems to find pretty good assistant coaches each year. Whether a few years ago it's Dave Aranda in 2019. They had his name escapes me right now, but the Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator. They seem to always have capable assistants, and even if they don't have really good assistants, it seems like the head coach does a good enough job to kind of fill that void. Like I always thought, like even if LSU with Les Miles, the offense was not maybe an exception there. Always a little shaky under Les Miles. Cam Cameron, their OC back then, but like under Les Miles, you always knew that even if maybe they don't bring in the best defense coordinator, it's going to be a tough, stingy defense, physical at the line of scrimmage. One or two key playmakers like a Tyrann Mathieu or a Patrick Peterson, game changer type guy. You always knew that was what you were going to get from LSU. And then that's what I did. Les Miles, kind of like Brian Kelly. There is haters out there. Say what you want about the guy, but they were always a physical, tough football team. Kind of like Les Miles comes from the Jim Harbaugh, coaching line from Michigan football, tough, physical football, run the ball, win the line of scrimmage. That's what you knew you were getting from Les Miles and LSU. So, Brian Kelly, even though, what's interesting about Brian Kelly, he's not really, I don't think he's actually a whole lot like Les Miles, but his teams do seem to have a physicality element to him, even though he doesn't really necessarily make that the identity of his football team. Like if you think Brian Kelly, you don't really think necessarily of like physical football, but you do think of offensive, defensive linemen who do their job, do their responsibility, and execute at a high level. It's being physical and tough. Is great, but like, if you a head coach, Brian Kelly, I think, does a good job of putting guys in a position to be successful. And that's what some of the players were saying about Matt House, their defensive coordinator, that, they didn't say this about Brian Kelly, but I'll say this about Brian Kelly. I think he, like they said about Matt House, I think Brian Kelly puts his players in a position to be successful. And Matt House, it sounds like their defensive coordinator does the same thing, put his players in a position to be successful. But yeah, I've touched on the schedule a little bit. I think that the stretch of Missouri, Auburn, Army, they got to win those games. I think they drop. Like I said, if they drop one of those games, that's going to really be tough. LSU. Excuse me. This has the feel like if LSU is going to do something special, they have to, number one, win that 3-game stretch, and they can't afford to lose a game they're not supposed to. Like, I'll say that, like, I think the most likely scenario, if they're one loss and they win the SEC title, is they drop one of the games to Ole Miss or Arkansas. Let's say they lose to Ole Miss. I think if they lose to Ole Miss, sometimes that loss for a lot of teams refocus you. I think that loss will refocus them. They get on a roll, and they've been battle tested, went through adversity. Obviously, if they lose a game, that means they were behind or close. I think that would likely make them more ready and hungry for Alabama. So, one loss to Ole Miss. SEC title, that sounds obviously very good for LSU, but that does sound like a likely scenario, or maybe it's to Arkansas, but to me, I think that, as much focus as LSU and Brian Kelly have on Alabama, I think a season where they lose to Alabama, not only is it good for their chances, because if they lose to Alabama head-to-head, then they would not have the tiebreaker. They would need Alabama to lose twice. But not only would it losing to Alabama put a damper that way, if they lose to Alabama, then it really means that they really weren't up to they likely would probably drop other games as well. Obviously, you could make the reverse case. If they lost to Ole Miss, they probably could lose to Bama. But to me, as much as Brian Kelly is focused on beating Nick Saban, you got to believe that. Dropping another game that they're not supposed to would probably be more likely. But Alabama, not to downplay that game at all. That's going to be a super tough game. But you got to believe LSU, Brian Kelly, and this team is going to be up for it. So I'm going to wrap with that. Thanks for tuning in to Bayou Bengals football. Make sure to stay tuned for the top LSU football talk daily. We got new podcasts dropping daily. We got clips coming. So thanks for tuning in. Until next time. Peace.